The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
From St. Louis Public Radio, this is Politically Speaking.
In the race for Missouri's 2nd Congressional District, only 2 Democratic candidates remain to see if they can flip the seat from red to blue. But with the new congressional map state lawmakers approved this session, that task will be tougher, as the new district now contains more likely Republican voters. On this week's episode of Politically Speaking, Democratic candidate Ray Reid joins the show to talk about his candidacy, his thoughts on policies, including the economy and gun control, and why he'd be a better congressperson than who is currently holding the position. Let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, the definitive show about Missouri politics.
We have to talk about things that matter to people.
I've tried to bring that same aggressive, iconoclast style with me to the United States Senate.
I think my district is a model for the state.
We put Missourians first.
You just kind of have to find the common ground with people.
I believe that this district deserves someone who represents their values.
After I came back to St. Louis, I started thinking that I could have a bigger role on the change that I wanted to make.
Welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, State House and Politics reporter Sarah Kellogg. Joining me is my co-host. He is the political correspondent for St. Louis Public Radio,
Jason Rosenbaum.
And our guest today, he is running to become the Democratic candidate in the race for Missouri's 2nd Congressional District,
Ray Reid.
Thank you for joining us on the show. Before we get started, we kind of want to know a little bit about you. Who are you and why are you running to represent Missouri's 2nd Congressional District?
Yes, so I am Ray Reid. I am born and raised in the suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri. I got my start in Missouri politics after my freshman year of college, in Governor Nixon's administration, working on the policy team, working on like bill reviews, clemency applications, and we got a little more than 70 folks pardoned for nonviolent drug-related offenses, which is really progressive looking at Missouri right now. After Nixon's administration went back to college, working with the It's On Us campaign, fighting sexual assaults on college campuses. And after college, got a job at the state party under Chairman Stephen Weber, working on House and Senate races and organizing across all 114 counties and on Senator McCaskill's 18 campaign. So I kind of say I got my government education under Governor Nixon and my political education under Senator McCaskill. Stayed with the state party in 2020 cycle. Then, after the 2020 election, I sat at a bonfire with a bunch of friends in Kirkwood, and we just talked about the issues that we care about. We care about universal health care. We care about student loan forgiveness. We care about union rights. We care about doing something about the gun crisis in America. And what stood between me and working on those issues was this federal office. So we decided to run for Congress.
What sets you apart from Trish Gunby, who is your opponent in this primary race?
I think I respect Representative Gunby. She has done an amazing job in the Missouri legislature. My decision to jump in this race wasn't necessarily because she or anyone else had any shortcomings. It was because I believe that the Democratic candidate to represent Missouri's 2nd District needs to represent this district in more ways than one and needs to be able to build a broader coalition across divisions of race, region, religion, gender, income, and age group. And I just didn't see how anyone else in the field played to a broader swath of the electorate than Jill Shoup played in 2020. So I think folks were ready for something fresh, something new, something to get excited about in the 2nd District.
And Gunby currently serves in the Missouri legislature and might have a higher name recognition. How do you plan to distinguish yourself from her as a candidate and get your name out?
Social media isn't real. It's not. Being on the doors is real. But if you were to use it, with a grain of salt, we started this campaign with about like 200 followers on our social media, and it's grown to like 30,000. And we've been, invited to come on MSNBC, and we've been to Washington meeting with a bunch of members. So our name is really getting out there, and I think folks, are hearing more and more every day about our campaign.
So I am a second district resident now, thanks to the Missouri legislature putting parts of Richmond Heights into the second district, which is probably a story we can talk an entire podcast about. But one of your former opponents, Ben Samuels, dropped out of this race, and he insinuated that one of the reasons why he dropped out was he felt like a Democrat can't win this district post redistricting. Why is he wrong?
He's wrong. I think not just him, but it's a disservice. And it's kind of selling our voters short to say that, folks can't be reached. A lot of those folks out there in Franklin County, Warren County, the rural areas of the district, they feel hardly reached. They're not hard to reach. So it's really just about meeting people where they're at, knocking on doors. We've been saying, everywhere is Democrat country once this Democrat's been there.
So if you win this primary, you will likely face off against Congresswoman Ann Wagner if she wins her Republican primary. Why do you feel like you would be a good candidate to match up with her in the fall?
Because like I said earlier, we are the campaign that, we're going to be able to reach a ton of voters that Ann Wagner is just going to have a ton of tough time getting to. That's why I said it takes someone, who represents this district in more ways than one. African American, younger, a proud product of union workers. My grandma, my mom, my sister, they raised me. I say I get my brains from my grandma, I get my patience from my mom, and I get my social attitude from my sister. And my sister's an auto worker, my mom's an educator, my grandma is a retired bottler for Anheuser-Busch. Proud product of union workers in this heavy union district.
I want to move on to the topic of inflation, which is widely seen as a big issue among voters in this election cycle. What would you do as a member of the House to address it?
Yeah, so Ann Wagner, guys, she blames Joe Biden for inflation, but just to be clear, $1,400 checks to the lower income Americans, that didn't cause inflation. Cutting taxes for Wall Street and the wealthiest 1% of Americans, while at the same time spending the Trump years voting for trillions of dollars in government spending, that contributed more to inflation than the social programs the president and House and Senate leadership are putting in place to help, folks who just need a little bit of breathing room.
So would you have voted for the Build Back Better plan, which is a program that some Republicans and Senator Joe Manchin argue would have exacerbated inflation?
I would, and I wouldn't have separated from infrastructure. Corey was right on that.
You're talking about Congresswoman Cori Bush, who voted against the infrastructure bill because she wanted the Build Back Better plan to be passed before infrastructure.
Yeah. And, I do a lot of talking. I see the world as it is and the world as it should be. We should always be fighting for the world as it should be. There's no doubt that Congresswoman Cori Bush wanted infrastructure improvements in Missouri. She was just fighting for the world as it should be, which I applaud.
In addition to inflation, another thing that's on the mind of voters right now is the higher price of gas. Are there policies that you would propose to alleviate the pain at the pump?
Yeah. So Congress, the House just passed a bill about price gouging at the pump, and Congresswoman Ann Wagner voted against it. I would have voted for it in a heartbeat. But I definitely would have followed House leadership on that one.
You list environmental justice and the climate crisis as one of the policies on your campaign website. And I'm sure that if you win this primary, Ann Wagner is going to be like, well, Joe Biden's environmental policies are causing the high gas prices and the energy problems in this country. I want you to respond to that preemptively, because I think that that's going to be a major line of attack among all Republicans attacking Democrats this cycle.
Yeah. So climate change didn't just happen. And I'm a product of Governor Nixon, and anyone who's aware or familiar with Governor Nixon, he's big on Missouri's natural resources. So that's kind of been instilled in me to do everything we can to preserve Missouri's natural resources and protect our farmers and their crops. So I'll do everything I can in Congress to combat climate change.
So we are recording this on Tuesday, June 14th. And by the time this podcast airs, it's possible that the Supreme Court could issue its ruling overturning Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
And if that does happen, Missouri is a state that has a trigger law that would ban most abortions in the state, with only an exception for an emergency concerning the life of the mother. There are no exceptions for people that become pregnant due to rape or incest. How would you push back against this if you were in Congress, and what would be your feeling if the Supreme Court follows through on what was detailed in the Political article?
Yeah. So just like before I answer the question, no woman owes you an explanation on her personal medical decisions, and that includes the government. There's a photo of me standing on the Capitol steps with Congressman Cori Bush last week that got a lot of attention. And I asked her, like, what's the path forward after the ruling that we think is going to come down comes down? And she told me, she's full of gems. I love Cori. But she told me, we do the work that we're already doing. We don't give up the fight. We continue to organize. We continue to march. We continue to do everything we can, elect progressive and just common sense elected officials on this issue, folks who will always fight for everyone's right to choose. I'm not ready to give up on the fight on that. I know a lot of folks in the 2nd District aren't either.
So based off that answer, if a bill came forward that would codify Roe versus Wade into federal law, which would make abortion legal in every state of the nation, you would vote for that?
I would put my voting card in as hard as I can to vote for that.
Do you think that this potential decision will end up incentivizing voters who are in favor of abortion rights to turn out at the polls in higher numbers than those who are opposed to abortion rights?
I think so. And I think Republicans are afraid of it. I think they know that they went too far with messing with women and their bodies.
How do you convince voters that truly believe abortion is wrong to vote for you? For many Missouri voters, they may be amenable to Democratic policies, but won't vote for Democratic candidates because of their support of abortion rights.
Yeah, and I've talked to a lot of folks in the Catholic community in particular. I attended a Catholic school in my formative years. If you really want to do everything we can to bring down the numbers of abortion, well, let's invest in contraceptives. Let's invest in programs that educate young kids about safe sex. Just investing in programs to bring down the numbers of abortion without taking away a woman's access to abortion.
Are there any restrictions on abortion that you would support?
No.
Why?
Because it's not government's business what a woman does with her body. Like, I don't believe that's my decision. I have no right to stand in between what a woman does with her body. That's between a woman and her doctor, period.
All right, we're going to move on to the topic of Ukraine. Do you support continuing to provide military and humanitarian aid to Ukraine?
I do. I believe that, the United States, we have a responsibility to stand with our allies around the world. So without a doubt, I'd support standing with Ukraine.
Would you have voted for the $40 billion aid package to Ukraine that Joe Biden signed into law? Why or why not?
I would, only because it's about just keeping our commitment to the Ukrainians and just, fighting against our adversaries in Russia.
What do you make of the argument that focusing on Ukraine detracts from domestic challenges?
Those same folks who were making that up or would also say we need to focus on a wasted war, not a wasted war, but overspending on a war in Iraq. This isn't the same kind of deal. It's about standing with our allies around the world.
So one more question before we go to break. Do you think that sanctioning Russia has been effective? Some would argue it hasn't really changed their decision-making.
It will. Russia's not exactly the superpower that they once were. I think their economy isn't anywhere as near as strong as the United States. So it's important to continue to crack down on Russia.
We need to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with 2nd Congressional District candidate Ray Reed.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
And we're back on Politically Speaking with our guest today, Ray Reed, who is running as a Democrat for Missouri's 2nd Congressional District. Let's get back into it with more questions. The next topic is on gun control. So this is another issue that's top of mind for folks now, is whether to pursue gun control. And if you make it to Congress, what policies around guns would you support?
Yes, so I've spent the last week in Washington doing the job that Ann Wagner should have been doing. I've been meeting with members. I met with members of the House and the Senate, members like Senator Joni Ernst, Mitch McConnell, um, Chris Murphy, just to talk about the issues. I met there with my friend David Hogg. Um, and, we're doing the job trying to build consensus around gun control. If we were to do nothing like many Republicans and Congresswoman Ann Wagner wants to do, we're only inviting what happened in Uvalde to happen again in the fall when kids go back to school. Um, I spoke at the March for Our Lives rally over the weekend, and I told kids, like, on stage, you deserve not to be shot in school. I'm sorry that like a lot of elected officials want to do absolutely nothing, but I won't stand on the side and while kids are like 19 kids are being gunned down in a classroom.
So what policies would you kind of, push for if in Congress?
Yeah, so I love that background checks is in the framework right now, but I want to see a ban on assault rifles. My brother serves in our armed forces. I know those kind of weapons of war, and there's no reason for an assault rifle, a military styled weapon, to be just around on the streets of our suburbs in Missouri.
Do you think that banning certain types of guns that you alluded to is kind of a fruitless endeavor just because there's so many in circulation right now?
No, because we have to do something. Because the alternative, Jason, is to do nothing, and to just let more flood the streets. Like, the framework right now is great, but it doesn't stop what happened in Uvalde from happening right now, or happening tomorrow in Missouri. Because in Missouri, because of Senate Bill 656 from 2016 that became law, you don't even need a license to conceal carry a gun in Missouri. Our state is just rolled back the clock, unfortunately, on gun laws. So we have to do more.
What do you think about the idea of red flag laws, which is the judicial process which could take away guns from people who are deemed a threat to themselves or others?
I think that's a good step. It definitely could have stopped a lot of mass shootings from happening, and could hopefully get a lot of guns off the streets in places like North City of St. Louis.
And what do you say to people who feel that this process could be abused and disarm people who are not a threat to themselves or others?
I often hear that it's an infraction, or it's a government overreach on their Second Amendment rights. But like, just to be clear, we used to have really bad auto fatality rates, but we studied the problem. We implemented seatbelt laws. We changed the way that streets were built so cars were less likely to bank. We studied the issue, and then we implemented laws to fix the problem. And over time, auto fatality rates have dropped. We can do that. We can bring that same kind of logic to gun laws. So I'm 100% in favor of doing everything we can to bring down gun deaths in Missouri.
So you mentioned the framework, which is this like tentative outline that kind of came about over the weekend. It involves monetary incentives for states to pass red flag laws, more funding for mental health programs, new governmental checks on people under 21 who are trying to buy a gun. Do you support this bill in progress, or do you think this doesn't go far enough?
It doesn't go far enough, but I support it. Something that like David mentioned to me is that like we have to do something. We're not going to get everything. He told me like right away, we're not going to get everything we want right away, but we have to do something, because the alternative, Jason, is just to do nothing. And like, I just can't sit around. And Wagner might sit around and do nothing, but I just can't sit around and do nothing.
I want to talk about something that may be a difficult question to answer, but I know that a lot of supporters of restrictions on guns like blame the NRA for inaction. And I think that is kind of a cop-out. I think that the reason why there are so many politicians who do not support gun control is because they go out and campaign. They are very upfront saying, I will not vote for any restrictions on guns, and voters keep voting them in. So is this really a problem with voters basically getting the policies that they were told? Or do you see this as a problem of interest groups influencing voters to vote for those people?
I don't think it's necessarily so black and white. I think it has to go in part with Democrats are just bad at messaging and have been in the past, and we let Republicans spin our narrative for us when we need to make it about, like, guys, kids are being killed in schools. Like, it's just not okay to continue to do nothing on this issue.
So before we move on to another topic, I do want to talk about the mental health aspect. And I want to just make it clear the framework doesn't have this idea in it, but there has been kind of this insinuation that certain people with mental health diagnoses or disabilities should not be able to have guns. And a lot of disability activists have pushed back against that idea, saying it's not just a Second Amendment violation, it's a 14th Amendment equal protection violation, especially if the mental health diagnosis has no nexus with violence. So I want to get your take on whether you would be in support of banning people with certain mental health diagnoses from getting guns.
I think it would depend on what those mental health diagnoses are. We have to bring in experts on that. But I'm 100% in favor of, if someone is clearly a danger to themselves and the folks around them, we have to get that gun away from them.
So we're going to move on to a different topic, which is COVID-19. It is still around, despite it being 2022. What policies would you pursue to continue to get the COVID-19 pandemic under control?
Yeah, so I'm running for Congress, so I'm going to throw this in there. My opponent, Congresswoman Ann Wagner, has spent the entire pandemic essentially discouraging local leaders from enacting life-saving measures. She wouldn't even encourage folks to wear a mask or get vaccinated. I would take a completely different approach and follow the White House leadership, not just the White House leadership, the experts in the White House's leadership on doing everything we can to combat the pandemic and make sure that folks are taken care of, whether it be through financial aid or making sure that folks in hospitals have the resources they need to fight this pandemic and just beat it.
Do you think that the Democratic support of things like vaccine mandates and mask mandates has backfired among voters? And are they even credible strategies anymore with Omicron being so contagious?
Yeah, so we've required kids to be vaccinated in schools for like decades now. And this is just another vaccine, guys. I don't think it's necessarily backfiring with voters. I think we just have to do a better job again with communication and communicating to folks how the vaccine is made and how safe it is.
Speaking of communication, I recently had COVID. I recently took Paxlovid, and I was able to get access to Paxlovid because I was extremely knowledgeable about the labyrinth-like process to get it. But I have run into people who have no clue what Paxlovid is, no clue about the fact that it prevents you from being so sick that you get hospitalized or die, and no idea how to get it. Do you think that there needs to be more emphasis on educating people about what Paxlovid is and what other therapeutics are and how to obtain them, rather than continuing to fight like the mask mandate wars or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really comes down to just how we communicate. We got to, again, meet folks where they are. So a lot of folks are on social media, so we got to just run those ads and informationals on social media and just contact. I'm holding my phone. Contact folks through their phones. Everyone's holding the phone. All three of us in this room are holding our phones.
I am, because I am reading the outline of these questions just to give a sense of how this podcast works. But continue.
Yeah, we just got to do a better job with just communicating with folks.
So I want to move on to our last topic, which is, I think, the most difficult topic in America today and for the past decades or centuries, and that's race relations. What would you do as a congressman to bridge divides between the federal government and Black people?
Well, I think we talked about this. We talked about on the night of the bonfire in Kirkwood. What are we gonna do? Like, let's make Democrats cool again, Missouri. That's how we win. Another thing we talked about was, what are we going to do when we get there? And it's, of course, passing that George Floyd Policing Act. And I think when I stand up there and take that oath of office, a lot of young African Americans here in the district and really around the state of Missouri are going to be encouraged that, oh, this isn't something that, is just for older white men or older white women. It's something that I can aspire to. The government is a place that I have a role in.
I mean, if you do end up winning this seat, you would be representing, like, I don't know what the percentage is of the second district, but it has to be in the single digits. It is not like wholly unusual for an African American to represent a largely white district. I mean, Emmanuel Cleaver is doing that right now. But do you think it would send a message to Missouri writ large that you don't have to necessarily run in a 50% Black district in order to represent people in Congress?
Yeah, and I think that's again where it goes to the cynics. Like, they're selling our voters short. Folks are okay with someone who's African American, someone who doesn't necessarily look like them, as long as they know that they have their best interest in heart and that they're doing they're enacting or pursuing the policies in Congress because they care about them, they care about their families.
Do you think that eradicating racism is something that Congress can even do? Or do you think it also is a combination of working with the state and local levels to come up with certain policies to break down traditional barriers that Black people encounter?
Yeah, Congress isn't really good at doing anything. I'm just going there to try to make it a little bit better. But I think it starts on the ground. It's not a trickle down issue with race relations. It starts in our community with improving our relationships with the police, with improving our relationships with just a Black guy walking down the street and not getting looked at weird.
Now, I want to hone in more on the law enforcement side. What are some? You mentioned the George Floyd legislation. I want you to be more specific about policies you would support that would, I would say, create more trust between Black people and the police.
Yeah. So when Congresswoman Wagner talks about funding the police, she talks about, making sure they have money to have tanks to roll down the streets of our suburbs, which is absolutely ridiculous. When I'm talking about funding the police, I'm talking about funding them inadequately, training them to have the resources and the training that they need to go into communities and address a wide range of issues, not turn our suburbs into a war zone.
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Mr. Reed, for joining us. Politically Speaking is a product of St. Louis Public Radio, which is part of the University of Missouri St. Louis, and you can access all our stories at STLPR.org. You can follow me on Twitter at Sarah K. Kellogg. Jason, where can people find you on Twitter?
Jay Rosenbaum.
And Ray Reed, where can people find information about your campaign?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at RayReedMO or on the website if you're a dinosaur like no, I'm just kidding. You can find me on the website at RayReedMO.com.
Well, in a similar vibe, do you have a TikTok?
I do, and we've got the messaging thing down. It's RayReedMO across all social media.
And what do you do on TikTok?
So we just push out videos. Like, I went on MSNBC and we just threw a video that I had on there out there.
All right. Until next time. So long.